let's wait. Okay. Thank you. Thanks a lot. So many people say, oh, it's magic because she's not a she, she's a he, and it's resembling totally Leonardo da Vinci. Take your photo, align it, and it's a so-called holistic face effect. It's just a simple explanation. You will always be like Leonardo da Vinci because Leonardo da Vinci is also just a human, and it has the same, order of eyes up. There's the nose and the mouth is low. So also there are a lot of other myths and so on. There's of course a golden ratio in it, but where to put the golden ratio? You can find the golden ratio. You can find the golden ratio also in your face, and also, by the way, I have proven it in Trump's face. So is it beautiful? I'm not sure. So La Gioconda, superlatives so far, but nowadays carves out a miserable existence behind a totally oversized frame made of bulletproof glass, concrete, and steel. This is the situation. You know, the Japanese Nippon Telecom put in 5 million, and it's now this ensemble. You cannot see it anymore. It's even mirroring. You know, this glass is not reflective free, and you cannot reach it, and so on. So in a way, problematic, and also it's now full of kitsch because everywhere is the Mona Lisa. You see it in living rooms. You see it here in Albania in a stock shop, and you see it everywhere. So, is it really the ultimate masterpiece? So, if you see it just in the books, if you see it in the Louvre, I would say please go to another painting of Leonardo, because then you have at least time to really observe it. But then, as a researcher, I have to say, well, we will show you that it's really a stunning masterpiece. The research question with the ultimate masterpiece was, what effects do authenticity information have on the appreciation of art? So we had several naive persons. So naive always, they are not trained in art or art history. And we had different familiarity levels. We had different artists, and we had 8 paintings from Da Vinci, Dali, Munch, Van Gogh. And the procedure was, we got them a little bit an art training, 10 minutes about, and then they had to evaluate 4 copies and then 4 originals. We framed them as this is a copy of an original and the other one are originals. Of course, only on a computer monitor, so very, very low, in a way, low ecological validity. And we had personality questionnaires, art expertise questionnaires, and the dependent measures was an 8-dimension construct of art appreciation. And what we found out is, as soon as you have really this authentic information, so you said this is an original, nearly everything went really better. The only thing that was an exception of the rule was the familiarity, which is a nice check variable to say, yes, the familiarity of the painting is as such the same. And you see there is better visual rightness that people assessed. More extraordinariness, more pleasure, more emotional value, more talent behind the artwork. So the artist was more appreciated, and the quality of the painting was also better. So just to say this is the original just has the effect, a framing effect, you could say, that it's more appreciated. So all these effects were quite big or medium high. Further results, there was no interaction with the familiarity level. So whether you know this painting or not doesn't make a difference. And there was an authenticity effect moderated by personality aspects. So for example, the consumer's need for uniqueness scale. So the central problem of art copies, you could say, as soon as you know it's a copy, it can be some copy, only the original is unique, and therefore you like it. And you like it much more than the others. So that was a very, very simple question. The next one is about the eternal masterpiece. So is it really the eternal masterpiece, and it is appreciated as such, and it's known as such? So what we did is we asked the question whether the Mona Lisa has really, it's the world's most known artwork, and it's portraying a person. So it's a portrait. It's maybe the most significant and most known face in the world, you could say. Yeah? Of course, you could also say maybe some celebrities, but on a long run, also combining across the generations, you will see that this is probably the most known face in the world. And now the interesting thing is we could address an interesting memory related perceptual question, and that is, do we have a very, very clear representation of this face? So we had 83 naive persons. The stimuli were two slightly different Mona Lisa versions. One is the original one, and the other one is a slightly elongated one where the inner configuration changed a bit. The procedure was, we started with an initial evaluation, whether the right or the left one is an original one. Then we made an adaptation phase, and then we had a post-adaptation phase after 3 minutes, and then 80 minutes later. And the dependent variables were just the veridicality, so whether this is the right one or the other one. And, this is the material, and typically it's quite easy to find out what is really. So people were quite good in assessing which one is really the right one. So the right one is not the right one, but the left one. Most people see this very easily, and they can even describe, oh yeah, something is wrong here. It's a little bit elongated. So in a way, we could say, wow, this is amazing. We have even this subtle, it's just about millimeters, but we have a subtle, very, very precise feeling that something is wrong. Although we would say, yes, it is in a kind, the Mona Lisa, but something is wrong. So it's 72% correct. But now, if you look at that version, and you see it, and of course you say, it's absurd. What's that? And even if I say, just ignore this, but just look at it, but just ignore it. It's just nonsense. You cannot do it. You won't evade from it, and it will make an impression on you. And if you look at it for 20, we did it for 30 seconds, it's quite striking. Because if you look now at it, you will see a shrinking effect. So this version now on the left side, which is the original, seems to be shrunk. The other one seems to be okay. So we are at least very unsure, and we did some other studies on these faces, and even after 1 week with other participants, it was even more striking. And even after 1 week, they still decided for the wrong version because the representation was adapted very, very fast. So quite interestingly, even these extremely well-known persons, and of course you could say even more well-known is maybe the picture of your mother or your father or your partner or so, or yourself, but this is hard to assess in an experiment because then we need the photographs of your father and so on, and that is hard to catch. But here this is available, and we could say that this kind of representation, yes, it is fine-tuned, but it is also very adaptive, which is quite interesting. So the discussion is the following. The Mona Lisa is indeed well known, but subtle differences can be seen, but also it is very, very fluid in changing. So you could say, well, what is the evolutionary benefit? A painting will never change, but of course it's also a face, and a face should be adapted in the mental representation because, of course, people change, typically. You know, they get older, typically. This is some biological constant, and they get gray hair, they get beards or no beards, and so on and so on. This is all changing. So now we come to the smiling masterpiece. This is something of a big dispute. You know, is she smiling? Is she smiling at all? Why is she smiling? Is she beautifully smiling, or the most beautiful smiling one? So La Gioconda already is called La Gioconda because she's the smiling one. So is this smile really unique, as it's always said? Is it mystic? Can it be simulated? So the rationale is the smile is subtle due to specific usage of low spatial frequencies in the mouth area. That was an idea March Livingston proposed in 2000. And it was really a big deal breaker. It was cited a lot of times. And it is not that like that. You know, smile would be very easy to catch. Leonardo was not so easygoing. He went for a much better strategy. And Gombrich, although this is of course from 2005 because it's a new edition, but had this idea about the low spatial frequencies much earlier. And he said, and March Livingston later on, that these specific areas here could be interpreted for the low spatial frequencies as something like, you know, a smile. So where do we see mostly the low spatial frequencies? Well, mostly it is said that if we look at something that is more peripheral, the low spatial frequencies are more important. But then we try to assure that she is smiling, and the high spatial frequency don't indicate this. And this was the idea of March Livingston, brings you in a dynamic way of always ascertain and non-ascertain that she's smiling, which is a very interesting hypothesis, but empirically it was never tested. So Mona Lisa changes her expression depending on where the observers look. So you look at the eyes, and the painting is life-size. So about the work is 73 centimeters high, but the face is about that, like a typical face is. And you look at the eyes, she smiles because the low spatial frequencies are most visible. Then you think, oh, she's smiling. You go to the smiling face, she's not smiling anymore. Fascinating thing. Before invention of the film industries, I would say stunning as a hypothesis. So here she also demonstrated it in Livingston 2000 in this paper, and she wanted to suggest, or she tried to convince us that this is a non-smiling one, this is a very smiling one. I think this is really more smiling than this, but here's also a smile. So it's not perfectly convincing what she showed, but it is highly interesting. So we did it as an experimental psychologists. We of course went for an experiment. We took 20 base faces. So this time not the Mona Lisa, but a kind of Mona Lisa. We took 80 faces. We combined them as morphs. That the identity is not anymore possible to detect. And then we had always this person as a smile and a non-smile face, and we created versions out of it. So we made a mouth neutral and the low. So this is the high spatial frequencies. This is the low spatial frequency, and you see not easily the differences. This is just one example, but you see at least that this is high spatial frequencies smile and low spatial frequency. It's a smile, you know, there's nothing to be added. This is a neutral face, and this is something ambiguous. So here, the low spatial frequencies, like in La Gioconda, the low spatial frequencies are a smiling one, okay, but a neutral face for the high spatial frequencies. Here it's the you could say anti-Gioconda version, because I've just flipped it around. Still, there is a mild smile. You know, this is maybe subjectively, I would say, it's nearer to the neutral. This is more to the smile, but it's subjective. Brian has different opinion. That's okay. It's a subjective measure, but it's very clear this is smile because it's smile. Okay. First of all, maybe just from your own inspection, I find it quite interesting, this version, the neutral one, because the neutral one is very, very unclear what she is thinking. You know, it's if you think about the theory of mind, this is very clear. She's happy. Here, it's not so clear because it's a mild smile. Here, it's neutral. What is a neutral person thinking about? So this was a first inspection before we started the experiment. I never thought about neutral faces, but here I had to. So what came out is if you look at the mysteriousness, and this is typically the thing we are mostly interested, because it is not said that she is smiling, but she's mysteriously smiling. She is a mystery. So if you look at that, and you look at the Mona Lisa version, which is this low spatial frequency smile, but a neutral high spatial frequency, you see indeed it's the most mysterious version. So quite an interesting thing. And you could say a first indication that Marsh Livingston theory is not so wrong, that it goes into the right direction. Now we went to 3 other experiments quite recently. So this is ongoing research, you could say. And we started with an experiment with just 100 milliseconds. Why? Because we thought, well, let's try out some pre-saccadic phenomenon. So where something like what Marsh Livingston described is not possible, that you always switch from mouth and from the eyes to the mouth, and also have a small version of the Mona Lisa, that it's not really easy to tell them apart, the low spatial frequencies and the high spatial frequency in the periphery or the central, because it's very near. And the large one was much bigger, where these factors really play a role. So only for the 3000 milliseconds and the large scale should be this effect. It was the same material, as you already know. This was the Gioconda condition, and these are the new results. It's first of all, it's about attractiveness, and you see now it's the following to read. Here's the Gioconda condition, and this is the scale from 1 to 7. So and what you see here is that the Gioconda condition is indeed, for the large and longer presentation time, it's indeed the most attractive one, which is quite, you know, it's a very slim effect. It's not a very strong effect, but it is really, it is higher than the neutral, it's higher than the anti-Gioconda. It's at least something that is very, very high, and it develops really over time. So it's only visible, this specific effect, if it's really a longer time. So you need the longer time, else it's not a fascinating one or an attractive one. Now look at the smiling. So for the smiling, it's clear there's a validity check. Here, the smile version must be always outperforming everything, because it's just about smile. It's not about a decent smile or a mysterious smile. It's just, is she smiling? And indeed, the pure smile is, of course, the maximum. The neutral is clearly very unsmiling. But here, the anti-Gioconda version is more effective than the Gioconda version, which is an indication that the story is a little bit different. That it is about different layers, maybe. So you have low spatial frequencies and high spatial frequencies, but it's more about maybe the ambiguity as such. And the ambiguity is even stronger than if you really, or the smiling is even stronger if really the high spatial frequencies are visible. So it's not the smiling as such explained, but the mysteriousness, and that is the most important variable. Remember, that was in the first experiment where we had, this was also an eye tracking experiment. There we found out that this is the maximum, the La Gioconda. It's still the maximum, but very weak effect against the neutral. And as I told you before, yes, the neutral version also has this quality of being mysterious, because you don't know exactly what's going on. That's my explanation. We have not asked the people, but here it really works. But it's not that people say she is particularly smiling, and it's really particularly that the smiling is relatively reduced, but still there is smiling, and it's not always visible. The problem with the whole thing is, I cannot show you now the data. It's just, we have finished the analysis 3 days ago. But what I can tell you already is we looked at the saccades between the characteristic between the eyes and the mouth. And there's absolutely nothing extraordinarily going on between the conditions. So they have nearly always the same number of saccades. So it's not this permanent switch between eyes and mouth and so on. This is not happening in the La Gioconda version. It is, in a way, you need time, yes, to develop it, but it is really more a static thing that you look at it and find it mysterious because there is a different layer which we don't understand, but it's not about the full smile. So that was paragraph three about the smiling masterpiece. Now I want to talk about the perfect masterpiece. So aesthetics which appeal us change over time, I often say, but you could say, well, with a Mona Lisa, it's not true, because people always admired it, which is indeed not true, by the way. It was very much admired in the time of Leonardo, a little bit later also by Vasari. It was praised, and then the painting was more or less forgotten. So it came onto display in 1912 again on the newspapers because it was stolen. In 1953, it was nearly destroyed by an activist, and so on and so on. So it came into more popular sense, and then the people. Nowadays, you see it in the Louvre. You enter the Louvre, and there are 2 signs, or 3 signs. One is toilet. The second one is Venus of Milo. And the third one is the Mona Lisa. And everybody looks for the Mona Lisa as a huge queue, and people dismiss the other great artworks of, by the way, also Leonardo da Vinci. So if you look at it, people, how do they describe it? I called this chapter the perfect masterpiece. And most people say, who come to our lab and have to qualitatively describe it, it's just wonderful, the color spectrum. The colors are so nicely and balanced. Well, if you analyze it, there aren't any colors. Okay, there's brown, there's yellow. It's exactly the colors we don't like so much typically. But here you could say, well, they are balanced out. Was this the wish of Leonardo? No, definitely not. So we cannot perfectly say how it looked like, but we have 2 possibilities to think about it. So first of all, there is a different version in the Prado Museum. And the Prado Museum, when people come to our lab, they say, oh, this is awful. What is that? It's totally kitsch. But this is about the color spectrum that is behind this painting. Why can we say this? Because you can, of course, filter it. What is now the top layer, so not the top oil paint layer, but the varnish. And if you remove the varnish, you can simulate that. It comes up with such a version. And it's really the same spectrum. It's the same colorization with one exception, that these leaves are different. One are red, the others are green. That's the only difference. The other one, the bluish, you know, this is blue. You see, this is blue. And people say, yeah, might be that this is the original version, or this was more original, how Leonardo planned it, but it's ugly. It's awful. This is wonderful. It's so nice color, it's balanced, and so on. So I was interested in that because it raises a lot of questions. For example, so this is a simulation by me, how it was about, you know, it's just filtering. You know, the colors are still in. I didn't add any colors. It's just filtering, nothing else. It's like you can do it with diapositives of the 70s or so. You filter it and the colors are still there, a little bit compressed, but they are still there. So if you look at it for a longer time, it already starts to become a little bit more appealing. So, but I don't want to be suggestive. I want to really try to give this over to participants who are naive to it. So the research question was, is La Gioconda really the perfect portrait, and the rationale investigating the robustness of preferences for the Mona Lisa? So this is the Louvre version. Well, there are two versions. Why? Can you see it? Strange. Paler, narrow. Here, Prado version also too. Oh my God. I added some, but I created them because, you know, maybe you see it. The one version is always the texture of the Prado, but with the shape of the Louvre, and the Louvre version with the shape of the Prado, and also the original Prado and the original Louvre. So what we did is, we call it morphing and warping. Warping is about shapes, morphing is about texture. And we did both. So we made the following. We produced material in the following case. So we took more Louvresque versions. So we put 75% Louvre versions in for the texture, and for the shape 75%. Of course, we went also to 100%. And you see, this was mainly our interest, that it's a combination of both versions to have a more fine-graded way of analyzing what the preference for a version is. So, and we started again with an interesting idea, with adaptation. So typically we are adapted, we could say, or we are exposed, we are familiar with the Louvre version. So we know the Louvre version, and it could be that just because we are familiar with the Louvre version, we dismiss the Prado version because it's just not familiar. So therefore we used a T1, T2 test design, and we started with one group with this version. So it's the original Louvre version, everybody knows. This is a kind of control condition because this is just what we know already. And the task was to observe it and analyze it for 10 minutes. If you give such a task to participants, typically they don't do it. Because what is it a task of? If you say, please observe it. They start observing it, and then after 2 seconds they say, well, I know the Mona Lisa, I don't look at it anymore. So we asked them to respond to a questionnaire about all things that have nothing to do with artistic quality or preferences. So something like describe the background, describe the garment, describe the hands, analyze the ears, all the things that are not artistically relevant, you could say. And we started with this version. So this is a kind of control version. And we see here Pradoesque versions. These are Louvresque versions. Oh, very easy. Finding expected. people don't like Pradoesque versions. The more Pradoesque it is, the worse it gets. Okay. But now we started this time with this version. And people said, awful, really awful. Please cancel it out. What is this? But we said, well, it doesn't matter whether you like it or not. It's about describing the painting. We didn't give any information about the painting, not that it is really, because it's now known, it was painted side by side, or at least we know that it's from the atelier, from the studio of Leonardo. So it was also started in 1503. I come back to this story later. So now they are exposed 10 minutes to this, and they have to elaborate it. And now look at the results. So now the Louvresque version is the one they dismiss. And it's not that the more Pradoesque, the better, but up to a certain point, it's true. And then 33% is the best one. So you have still a lot of Pradoesque version, so 67%, but still a little bit familiarity with the other. This is the perfect one. And now look at the general level of artistic quality here, and it is even higher than the original Mona Lisa. Which means that you can change the aesthetic standards very soon by elaboration, by familiarity, and afterwards we let people describe the two works, and they said, well, honestly, the Louvre version is totally dull, because it is. And Leonardo would be the first, I guess, who would drag it down and would remove the varnish, because it's really dehumiliation of this artwork, that the varnish is not removed. But they don't like the idea, the Louvre, to remove it, because people would complain, they say, because it's so bluish. But our data, I think, says, yes, it would be a catastrophe in the first couple of minutes, and then they would love it. And maybe then they would come back with a real honor to this great painting. Paragraph 5, the double masterpiece. So our initial question is, how do other versions of the Mona Lisa relate to the original in the Louvre? We had seen one version, which is quite interesting, but it's clear that there are really a lot of paintings, also in Britain, who are meant to be, you know, copies or influential copies made very, very similar style of the Mona Lisa. So is there really a magical thing in the Mona Lisa? So you look at these versions and they are all resembling more or less. And this version was particularly interesting. And in the beginning, it was also dismissed. It is the Prado version. And if you see it, it was attributed, this one, the Reynolds, to the 17th century, the Vernon to the 16th, the Prado, the 17th, Walter, 16th, and the Isleworth was in dispute maybe at the end of the of 1590 or 99, something like that. That was also disputed, maybe even an original of Leonardo, which is, I think, not a very plausible hypothesis. But this version was also dismissed as just a cheap copy. And the Louvre asked for this copy because they had a big show of copies of Leonardo da Vinci. And so they asked also the Prado and said, well, okay, here is the French government. We organized this for the Louvre and so on. Please send us this cheap copy. And they said, well, first of all, we have to analyze it on our own. Because, yeah, it's a cheap copy, maybe because it's on the 17th century, but we don't know so much of the painting. Okay, it resembles not so much. The hairstyle is maybe a little bit different. The background is totally missing and so on. And so they looked very cheaply, just with infrared on it in a first glance. And they found out, oh my God, there is a background behind, and the background is like that. Because it was just a cheap copy, they said, oh, just remove the varnish, just look how it looks. The varnish and this background, it was just cheaply made, typically for the 17th century. Yes, it was overpainted in the 17th century. Then they analyzed the 22 layers instead of the 28 of the original. And what they found out is quite stunning. There were the same corrections in the second and the third layer. So very, very low in the painting process of about 1503. They found the same corrections. So the same corrections to be done later on is not possible. So art historians were then from that moment on very, very safe in saying probably not a Leonardo, but painted at the same time. But now a strange thing happened. So it was now said, okay, 1503, maybe from the studio, but they looked at it and said, but still, it's not really the Mona Lisa. So what I said is because the colorization is different and so on. So I showed, no, this is not the real issue. The colorization is quite simple. And this is really a very simple simulation of mine. So it's not the perfect simulation. But now look at it, the left and the right version. And from a mere a mere inspection of both versions, it came to my mind that the direction of painting or the orientation is different. So it was painted from a different standpoint. So I discussed this with esteemed art historians. They say, well, sorry, it's a cheap technique. We know it all over from world history. You have the painting, there's the original painting. It's so nice, so you repaint it and make a little bit of twist. So you go there and then you repaint it and then it's a different perspective. As a perceptual scientist, we know this is absolutely nonsense because it's a 2D picture. So now we know from the notebooks of Leonardo that no one in the world maybe had so much done for understanding how 3D comes to 2D on the retina. He didn't come up with a perfect clue, I have to say. So there's no note that really made the final thing with disparity, because he had one problem. Leonardo had one problem in his ideas. He always used as models of understanding spheroids. And spheroids look always from all time, from all perspectives the same. They are spheroids. They have no real perspective, you could say. That was a big problem. But he had a lot of sketches about the idea how to bring 3D on 2D. He was maniac on this idea. So the thing is, if you look at both, for example, also the chairs are a little bit twisted, a little bit. If you look at from the left eye and the right eye on such a chair, typically you have also only a mild twist. If you think about that, you are typically 2 meters away from the model. So what we did is we simulated it and we saw that there's a twist in it. And there's also a kind of zoom in the background. So the background is not really, it's not a different perspective. Also not the face. The face is not really changing, but the lower part. So what we did now is to try to find out from which angle really this was painted and this was painted. And it is about this configuration, but it's overestimated here just to make it more clear. Here with Playmobil, the master. Here the pupil probably, but that's only a hypothesis that there was a pupil involved. We know from history that Giacomo Caprotti, called Salai, was one of the most beloved pupils. In fact, they were in love together, and he painted a lot for him. So it's most probable that it was not Melzi, but Salai who made maybe the core work, which is very typical for a studio. And probably it was Leonardo who finished the whole painting. This is, by the way, a painting by Leonardo depicting his boyfriend, Salai. So the two perspectives, and that is now quite interesting, resemble, if you look at the disparity of the two pictures, nearly exactly. If you look at the databases of Farkas, they have measured really all kinds of eyes. And if you look at the Italian male's norm, it is this about 6.3 centimeters, and it's exactly that. What we found out, we had found out that this distance is 6.9 centimeter. So what does this mean? So, so first of all, these two pictures have been painted from a different perspective. Whether this was intended or not, we don't know. Maybe it was just the pupil's work, the master's work. The master said, okay, I look on your shoulder, you know, he could, what's going on, and so on. From time to time, he said, Salai, my beloved one, this should be better, and this one also. It could also be that it was just fully in parallel, and he finished just the face, because this was the typical thing that many things were made really without the face, and then the face was added. But if you look at the disparity map, so where are differences between core points? You see, okay, here is a twist, but it's just the scaling, you know, with the exception of this one line, it's all the same, but it's only going up. So that means it's just a change in the y-axis. So it's a translation effect. So this is not a 3D thing, but here you see relatively constant that there is disparity from X to on the x-axis, and this is exactly what disparity is about and stereoscopy is about. So here you see it also with a disparity and depth map. So now look at, this is the overlay, so we don't have 3D or anaglyph glasses today, else you could see it easily, but I have also simulated here with MATLAB, and the nice thing is I just started. So how did I do it? I just put these two pictures, two oil paintings, into a typical machine in an algorithm that is used for photographs to recalculate the three-dimensional structure behind two a stereogram photograph pair. And what you see now is the simulation. So already you see strong 3D-ness. So this is very 3D, this part. And now we go further, and we tilt it a bit, and you see that there is extreme 3D-ness in. So now a very famous art historian who most know from Oxford University, he always he disqualified it and said, well, it's just a hypothesis. I would say, no, this is not a hypothesis. I think it's the only physical proof I've ever really provided, because typically we cannot prove it physically. We just are bound to probabilistics. But here, the information, the 3D information, is in these two pictures. The important thing is, was this intentional? We don't know. It is highly probable that Leonardo was on the way to find out what really 3D and the perception of 3D is. He was keen on knowing it. He was working on it. And we don't know whether he really tried it with this painting or this pair of paintings, but if you look at the history of photography, it was invented in the 20s of, so 200 years ago in the 19th century. The stereoscope is about the 30s by Wheatstone. By the way, the term photography is just about 180 years old. And there was a dispute about the pseudo 3D sketches from Chimenti from Italy, but they turned out to be not 3D. And so our guess is this is the first stereogram and it's in oil. So the interesting thing is, maybe you watched it out, that there's one extreme difference between the Prado version and the Leonardo version that is now in the Louvre. Maybe you have found it out. It's not only the colorization, it's also the so-called sfumato. The sfumato is this that that he developed also and brought it really to art history as a concept, and that means that the borders are not anymore very sharp. So he made something like a smoke. It is like smoky. It's like fuzzy. It's like in the erotic movies in the 70s that they had this fuzzy filter on it to make it more smooth and nice and so on. And now you could say, well, why did he use the sfumato? Well, first of all, it's appealing. Second, it is nice that that it is not this very strict line and so on. So it's really a master idea. That if you think of the following, you have two paintings or you have two depictions, independent of which technique it is. And you have, of course, not the perfect capability of having one time Brian from this perspective and then from this perspective, because until photography was invented, and even with photography, with the plates, they were never really plain. If you are not perfectly aligned, and if you cannot really provide the perfect depiction of Brian or Lisa Gherardini or whom else, then one interesting technique is to make one a little bit blurry. And you can try it out if you have ever done stereograms. This is the most effective technique. You know, it was also used before. So you would take one as a little bit blurred one, the sharp one. The sharp one is the one where you really identify the contours. And the other one is blended in, but three-dimensional. This is definitely only a hypothesis, but it would be adding to the ingenuity of Leonardo. So closing remarks. Apart from any type of conspiracy theories, I would say there is not a Da Vinci Code behind, and we can learn a lot. And I could extend this story, but today I had only 50 minutes or 45 or something else. I would have loved to add some other things, like, for example, there's an old dispute in art history whether the background is a real one or just a tapestry. We know it now. It is a tapestry. And the tapestry is not only the background, but also the background with a loggia, this balcony. The balcony and the background of the mountains are the same. It's one plane. Why can I prove that? It was, of course, only a speculation until now, but now we can prove it because we have a 3D model of the Mona Lisa. So we can also simulate the background, and the background is absolutely, it's only zoomed in, but consistently zoomed in. So there's no depth in it between both pictures. And if we think that both were really situated in the same room, it was the same tapestry, it was just a different distance, but there's no single cue of depth in it. So we can learn by this masterpiece, and it's really a truly masterpiece. And I think this is a lot of qualifications, that there's so much possible research in it, and also he directly provided so much. And therefore, I think the real masters of art, and of course, I also want to add Dürer, Vermeer, Seurat, demonstrated that the arts and sciences have been strongly and successfully linked together in former times. I just recently published a paper where I made clear that if you make art history and ignoring perceptual science, then you have a very, very poor kind of art history. We need perceptual sciences for art history, but it is not a strong link anymore. It was a strong link with Arnheim, with Bamberg, with Gregory, and so on. So we need such strong links back to learn from each other, because we can learn a lot from the artists, and the artists can be inspired by us. So conclusion, let's work with artists together. Let's make art and perception happening. I want to invite you to make contributions to art and perception. I'm also an editor-in-chief of this journal, together with two other great persons. And yeah, here are some references. And I invite you also all to the VSAC to Mainz, to the beautiful city of Mainz in Germany next August. Thank you very much.
Great talk. Questions?
Yes, Brian, please.
You talked about adaptation. What is it that's adapting?
What is adapting? So first of all, there's a big controversy about After Effects, adaptation, and what is adapted. Is it priming, or is it something different? In my perspective, if you let people look at faces that are distorted, and you will be able to predict what people find out as or qualify as veridical versions one week later, which we did meanwhile, then there must be some kind of memory component, I would say. Others say, no, this is still perception, but I'm not sure what kind of perception is it that has a memory component. So we need something, a component. And I think it is very important that from time to time, you adapt your mental representation. So for me, at least, this kind of adaptation is really updating the mental representation. And you can retrieve it then faster if it's towards this. So for example, if you are now having a beard, I would say in the first moment, oh my God, what have you done? But next time, still it's maybe a little bit unfamiliar, but then of course it would be strange if I wouldn't have integrated it, because if I always said, well, Brian, what has done, what have you done with your face? You know, this would be a little bit strange, not very. Yeah.
I suppose my question was more, is it relatively low level or high level? Because one could imagine that the geometry of it, you can, put forward an explanation in terms of rather low level factors.
It's a very good question. I have made extensive research on face adaptation, and what I'm always doing is we use different, we call it first of all, the pictorial version, so where really the same face is used. And this is very strong, but it doesn't mean that it's really the mental representation. Maybe it's just a low vision thing, and it's more about this single picture, or not the face as such. So what we have done then further is the so-called structural version, where we use another version, which is really very different to the version, so a different photography, and look whether there's a transfer effect. And this is also happening. But also there's a weak but still detectable effect for all faces. So in a way, I would say the whole face space is adapted a little bit, and specifically the faces that are really that were targeted. So it's more a high level. I would say. But I have also evidences from, for example, contrast adaptation, and now we have also luminance adaptation with faces. And this also works. And there, I would say this is a component more attributed to the low vision. I have not a conclusive answer. Probably it's intertwined. Both are affected.
Other questions?
Yeah.
I have one.
Yes.
If I
Well, sorry, can I tell you a silly story? But it's a Bristol story. I was an undergraduate here, undergraduate student, and a good friend of mine was Frank Quinault. And we both ended up in St Andrews teaching there. And so I'd known him for years and years and years. And he had the office next door to me in St Andrews. One day I walked in and I met him in the corridor outside. And I said, "Oh, Frank, you've had your hair cut." He said, "No, but I've shaved off my beard." So I knew there was a difference, but I didn't know what that difference was, which sort of relates.
Exactly. So what I did when I was working still in Berlin, I used the photographs of all team members, and I exchanged eyes, mouth, and so on of the photos, and then I showed them to them and said, "Well, this is now the new picture for the department website and so on. Are you happy with it?" Then I would. And they all said, "Oh, you have changed something." And it was exactly like you said, because it's a holistic effect. So you change the nose and you think something is here changed. You know, it's really magic. You cannot attribute it. And it's even worse that, I made a demonstration with, for example, with George Clooney. I showed George Clooney and I said, "Well, who is this?" "Yeah, of course, this is George Clooney," and so on. It's the characteristic smile, the characteristic eyes, they say, and so on. So they have no idea what the eyes and the mouth is, because it's always my mouth and my eyes. Yeah? And they don't spot it. And my eyes are very different to George Clooney. And the interesting thing is, if there's this James Tanaka effect from 1993, Tanaka and Farah, and they showed that if you learn a full face, you cannot really identify the eyes and the mouth properly, even if it's really very familiar material or persons. And we extended this research in 2005 and showed that you can also learn very, very effectively the mouth and the eyes and noses not so much. And then you cannot recognize them anymore in a face context. So the face context is so holistic and interactive that it always changes the whole gestalt. Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
For the come back to the copy and original.
Yes.
Yeah. Was it exactly the same image?
It was exactly the same.
It was the same images, but just the labeling, which was different.
We had also an additional condition where we added frames, but of course only every second, and so not confounded with other factors. The framing effect was not very strong. Also a little bit more appreciation, but it was slightly, but it was really the same version. Yes.
Okay, because that was the interesting how strong the labeling can.
Yeah, and I think Brian once saw a talk about my research about. It's really a strange research. I have never published it due to some contentious or the content of it. It was about paintings by Adolf Hitler. Yeah, so I showed pictures of Adolf Hitler, so which is not a very common thing to look at. Most people don't know it. It's not very well done art, but still it's aquarelle. And we made the story, okay, this is this is an art dealer. He was catched. He had a private collection, and it is true, this story, by the way, in Munich. And he had 1,800 paintings that were dealt with the Nazi regime, you know, and they were super keen, and that story was faked. they were very keen on some masters, for example, because he was also sympathizing with the fascists, Dali. The second thing is true, but the first is not true. And and they saw it with the idea that it's early Dali, uncovered Dalis. And we faked also the signatures. We put in all Dali, and always when they looked also at the signature and so with the eye scanning. So when they really scanned it and saw, oh, then even it was much better than before, but they say, oh, this is a masterpiece, the talent is great, the color spectrum is nice. And then we said, oh, it was not really true, and now look at it again. And we had, of course, also the other order, with starting with Adolf Hitler, and they just dismissed everything. They found it just disgusting, awful, the talent was low, and so on and so on. So it's a big effect of who it made, context. Yes. And it's hard to find a journal, I think, that I don't know.
It's a pity he was. It's a pity Adolf Hitler wasn't a better artist.
I always say this, or others said, you know, because many people, especially in Germany, always say, well, he was super untalented, and therefore he was not. He was dismissed by the art school in Vienna. But you know, most people are dismissed, and it would be good to think about, to not dismiss so many people in art schools. Maybe we have a little bit more problems, but other people have not started with art and still are a catastrophe for the world.
Priscilla, you had a question.
Yes.
If I can talk properly. Are you suggesting that Leonardo actually deliberately was investigating stereovision?
Yes. Yes.
And so he actually deliberately introduced this clarity cue.
So, yeah.
Because he was beginning to understand it.
No, Priscilla, so I wouldn't say whether I believe in this or not, but this is proven, that he was very deep in the idea of how stereoscopy works. So he wouldn't have called it stereoscopy because it was clear that it has something to do with the two eyes for him, but it was not clear how disparity works, you know? But it was very clear that it was one of his most important topics in his life. So it was not only anatomy and so on, you know, he had a lot of wisdom about the body, but he had not the final clue probably, because we only have access to 1/3 of the notebooks, which is extensive already, but there are a lot of lost also. So we don't know, but we also know that the Mona Lisa painting, and along with the Prado version, was always protected by him, and he never gave it out. He never sold it. You know, he always traveled with it, even to France. Therefore, it's now in France, because François Premier got it. So there is something very special, an intimate relation. But of course, I don't know, and this is very important, and the paper also does not say anything else. We don't know whether this was intentional done, these two versions. You know, you could also think about, you know, the sleeves. One is green, one is red. You know, and he worked on, but I only found orders of blue glass and white glass. So he worked on glass and colored glass. Why? I don't know. I didn't find anaglyph glasses, but he had the power to think about these things. I'm pretty sure. But we don't know. We don't know. This is speculation, but that there is 3D information in it. You can just on your own just try it out, because it's there. Both pictures together make up from this point on. And this is also important. There is one strong attack on this paper. They say, well, that the full paper is not 3D, and therefore it's clear that it was not intentionally made. First of all, I never said intentional made. I just said from here to here, it's 3D. And that is 3D. So, and we know, if you know a little bit of art history, they never painted, you know, Lisa Gherardini comes, the master paints, and then he's finished. No, there was one person, a maid or something set there that was the body, because the body was exchangeable. We have no idea how a body looks like. It was like the ancient sculptures, you know, the king was out, or the emperor, the Caesar was out, so cut the head and put another on. So one pupil mostly did all the stuff that was laborious, and then the masters typically worked on the faces, because this was really very, very important. So there were different layers, and I would say it has 3 layers: the face, the background, including the loggia that was painted at once, and the body from here on.
We're getting quite late, so one last question, and then we're having some drinks, and you can discuss further on.
So Matteo has a yeah. Oh,
Just a quick one. It's a pure speculation following what you were just saying. But I was thinking, Michelangelo was famously left-handed. It could be very simply the fact that he was looking at it and the pupil was looking at it from the opposite perspective, and so there is a slightly different point of view.
What do you mean with opposite?
Like if I have to paint with my right hand, I will
Yes.
look this way. If I have to paint with a left hand, I have to look this way. So the
but Leonardo was a left-handed.
yeah,
Yes.
but maybe the pupil was right-handed, and therefore the difference.
So we don't have any record of Salai. So this is a hypothesis that it's Salai, by the way. Of course, this is just a hypothesis. But Salai was not reported to be a left-hander.
Okay, yeah.
But also he was quite unimportant, you could say. So whether there are really some details like left-handed, right-handedness reported, but we have no indications that he was left-handed, and left-handedness was something that is typically was noted, you know, because it was something linked for ingenious or something like extraordinary. And with Leonardo also this idea, okay, he was different. You know?
Ridiculous suggestion.
Yes.
Of course. You correctly say that actually having the artist in one of 2 positions is represented by a rotation around the.
Exactly.
But an alternative interpretation would be, of course, that the model was actually rotating their head.
Could be. Could be, but then the chair wouldn't be compatible. And with the chair, I have to say, this is not just that we have the impression or something like that. If you really look at it, you see parts that are not visible with the others, and you cannot see them because they are covered, because they are really, it's really a clear tilt. So, yes. Yeah. But maybe with this.
Exactly.
All the time.
This is possible. This is possible. Of course, we cannot exclude it. But I think if you look also at this deep relationship between the Salai and him, it would be the typical thing. He looks over the shoulder and corrects him because he wanted to have a new upcoming star. So my interpretation, but it's only an interpretation.
Thank you very much again.
Thanks a lot for having me.
And let's go outside and have a glass of wine, and you can continue chatting there.
Thanks a lot.